Good day everyone, welcome! My name is Loreto Atamosa, and for today's video, we will talk about the economic strategies, a topic under the aspects of industry performance. And at the end of this video, everyone is expected to define the monetary policy, fiscal policy, and foreign trade policy, to identify the different tools of monetary policy, fiscal policy, and foreign trade policy. And lastly, to explain how monetary policy, fiscal policy, and foreign trade policy functions in the economic system. Alrighty, let's start! Again, I welcome all of you to this video discussion. This lesson focuses on the context of economic strategies. So this lesson provides you understanding of monetary policy, fiscal policy, and foreign trade policy. I'm looking forward to engaging in this topic with you over this video. Ready? Let's start! First, we have monetary policy. Monetary policy is a set of actions available to a nation's central bank to achieve sustainable economic growth by adjusting the money supply. So monetary policy refers to the use of monetary instruments under the control of the central bank to regulate magnitudes such as interest rates, money supply, and availability of credit with a view to achieving the ultimate objective of economic policy. In the Philippines, the Central Bank of the Philippines is an agency of the government who is responsible in implementing policies pertaining to money supply. So the central bank uses monetary policies to regulate money through credit and banking system in order to achieve monetary stability, contributing to the economic development. And so, these are the goals of the central bank in instituting monetary policy. First is to maintain internal and external monetary stability in the Philippines and to preserve the international value of the peso and its convertibility to other freely convertible currencies, and to foster monetary, credit, and exchange conditions conducive to a balanced and sustainable growth of the economy. Therefore, the Central Bank of the Philippines regulates the movement of money through the banking and credit system, which serves as a conduct of funds from sources of users. And so, the Central Bank of the Philippines follows a simple formula when it comes to credit and money supply. So when the economy is growing rapidly, it tightens credit. When it is growing slowly, it loosens credit. So tight and easy money generally operate in cycle. So when a money has an easy for too long, such as that investment, production and income are exceeding resources limits, tight credit may have to be applied. And when money has been tightened too long, such that the economy is running at a dragging pace, credit may have to be loosened. So to effect these changes, the Central Bank of the Philippines has to institute the following tools. These are required reserves, rediscounting, open market operations, selective credit control, and moral suasion. Let's go ahead and discuss it one by one. First, we have required reserves. So the Central Bank of the Philippines decides in general terms what the lending behavior of the commercial should be. So at any time, it may change the percentage at which bank can lend out of their deposits. So in some cases, these percentage can be as low as 80%, and in some it may be as high as 90%. So using this prerogative as the banker of the commercial banks, the central bank, in order to influence the bank's lending behavior, simply requires them to keep a certain percentage of their deposits in reserve. Therefore, when they decide that lending behavior should be at 80%, the reserves it requires is 20%. With that being said, reserves requirements are the amount of funds that a bank holds in reserve to ensure that it is able to meet liabilities in case of sudden withdrawals. So reserve requirements are a tool used by a central bank to increase or decrease the money supply in the economy and influence interest rates. Which means reserves requirements refer to the percentage of bank deposits and deposit substitute liabilities that banks must set aside in deposits with the Central Bank of the Philippines. We call it the BSP or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, which they cannot lend out or were available through reserve-eligible government securities. So changes in reserve requirements have a significant effect on money supply in the banking system, making them a powerful means of liquidity management by the BSP. Second, we have rediscounting. Now, in addition to required reserves, the central bank enjoys another prerogatives from being the bankers of banks. So this prerogative is called rediscounting. Normally, the central banks lends money to commercial banks on the basis of loan papers that the banks have. However, it sets the limit to the funds that commercial banks can borrow and designate the rate of interest at which it lends. So the central bank rediscounts this loan paper, and the rate of interest it charges is called the rediscount rate. And so if the central bank wants to constrict deposits and money supply, it simply reduces the amount of funds it makes available and or raises the discount rate. For example, instead of giving up to 85% of the face value of the loans, it may give up only to 65%. So the rediscount rate also provides a signal to the commercial banks on trend of interest rates in general, and is therefore helpful when central bank seeks to control interest rate. With that being said, rediscounting is a privilege of qualified Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or the BSP supervised banks to have approved and active rediscounting line with the BSP to obtain loans or advances from BSP using the eligible papers of its end-user borrowers or the EUB as collaterals. So it is a standing credit facility to help banks meet temporary liquidity needs by refinancing the loans they extend to their clients. Third, we have open market operations. So another tool of the Central Bank of the Philippines is open market operation. The central bank, along with other commercial banks, actively participate in the purchase and sale of government securities in active money market. Hence, it is called open market operation. However, this kind of tool is good only for affecting small changes in bank loans and money supply. So to slightly tighten money supply, the central bank sells government securities into the money market, and when it wants to ease, it buys securities. So through the sale of government securities, the commercial banks feel the tightness in their funds and would not be willing to lend money to clients. So on the other hand, when the central bank buys security, it injects funds to commercial banks, thus making them feel some ease in having funds, which means open market operations refers to the practice of buying and selling government securities along with other securities. So on the open market, in order to regulate the supply of money that is on reserve in Philippine banks, the central bank purchases treasury securities to increase the supply of money and sells them to reduce long-term interest rates. And so the objective of open market operations is to adjust the level of reserve balances to manipulate the short-term interest rates and that affect other interest rates. So the Federal Reserve conducts open market operations to achieve the desired target federal funds rate by buying or selling government bonds from or to commercial banks. Fourth, we have selective credit control. So this tool lets the Central Bank of the Philippines select the kind of credit it will give to the clients. So it tries to prioritize its lending activity either to production or consumption. So if its priority is for production, credit or consumption is lessened and gives more funds to production and vice versa. So selective credit controls are intended to encourage or discourage specific types of investment and expenditure by influencing the lending policy of banks and similar credit institutions. And lastly, we have moral suasion. So this tool tries to test the persuasive ability of the chairman of the Monetary Board and governor of the Central Bank of the Philippines. So the central bank may hold sessions with commercial banks and try to persuade or make suggestions to heads of commercial banks to redirect their efforts in national development goals. So moral suasion is the act of persuading a person or group to act in a certain way through rhetoric's appeal, persuasion, or implicit and explicit threats, as opposed to the use of outright coercion or physical force. So in economics, it is sometimes used in reference to central banks. Anyone can, in principle, use moral suasion to try to convince another party to change their attitude or behavior. But in economic context, it generally refers to central bankers' use of persuasive tactics in public or private. So it is often simply called suasion, and the motives behind it are not always altruistic, but have more to do with the pursuit of particular policies. Ready? And now let's proceed with another strategy, which is fiscal policy. So the government is a vital agent for the productivity of the different sectors of the economy. So it can affect a more efficient allocation of resources through taxation of undesirable activities by giving tax exemption and subsidies to those activities which are crucial to continued development. So in order to understand how government operates in terms of acquiring revenues and how these funds are spent, fiscal policy is introduced in this lesson. Now, fiscal policy necessarily concerns itself with the manipulation of the inflows, meaning the government spending, and outflows, meaning taxes, of the government sector, which means these actions are oriented towards stability in the economy and promoting economic growth. So fiscal policy refers to the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, especially microeconomic conditions, including aggregate demand for goods and services, employment, inflation, and economic growth. So fiscal policy is often contrasted with monetary policy, which is enacted by central bankers and not elected government officials, meaning fiscal policy refers to the use of government spending and tax policies to influence economic conditions, which means taxation is the tool of fiscal policy. And when we say taxation, it refers to as the inherent power of the state, acting through the legislature to impose and collect revenues for the purpose of supporting the government and its recognized objectives. So taxation then is the act of laying a tax. It is a process or means by which the sovereign, through its lawmaking body, raises revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. So taxes are levies that government put on people or businesses in almost every country in the world. Taxation is used mostly to raise money for government spending, but it can also be used for other things. However, taxation is not just a means of deriving income for the government, but also as a tool to control the supply of money in the economy. So it is an instrument to manipulate the conditions in the economy. So in a period of inflation, taxation becomes an effective tool that can be used to siphon off excess money in circulation, meaning an increase in tax rates will lessen the disposable income of the people and cause their demand to decrease. So unnecessary spending tends to be eliminated, and this tends to pull prices down. So fiscal policy aims at taxing extraordinary profits, consumptions, and importation of luxury items, especially during inflationary period. So in the process of income is brought down to the limits imposed by the economy. And so during deflationary periods, what the government may do is to give subsidies and deductions or suspend the effectivity of increase in tax rates. So instead of reducing tax rates, so that is to discourage spending on non-essential goods. So the government simply taxes these goods and the effect is less consumption spending channeled to them. Next strategy, we have foreign trade policy. So foreign trade policy is a set of activities that tends to manipulate imports and exports of the economy. So it controls the level of money supply in its desired level through export and imports. Foreign trade policy is a series of activities aimed at influencing the economy's imports and exports. So through export and import, it maintains the optimum level of money supply. So importation of goods and services from a broad drain funds away from the circular flow. So on the other hand, exports of goods and services constitute injections of funds into the mainstream. And so imports and exports not only have an income but price effects as well. Imports tends to bring down domestic prices by bringing into the system more finished goods or raw materials for processing into final goods. And at the same time, they bring out funds. In a sense, then, the import function is stabilizer on an economy. So the opposite holds true for exports. Ready, and there are also tools for foreign trade policy, and these are administrative or exchange control, exchange rate regimes, and tariffs and subsidies. And so let's discuss this one by one. First, we have administrative or exchange control. So this is a tool that tries to avoid the dollar deficiency by controlling its sale. So through the system of rationing the available dollars by a set of criteria administered by a government body, importers and other users are frustrated. So this overall reduction in the quantity demanded for dollars may be achieved by general or selective controls depending on the administrative body doing the control. Example, it may limit the sales of a dollar for some or all items to be imported or paid in dollars. So exchange controls are government-imposed limitations on the purchase and or sale of currencies. So these controls allow countries to better stabilize their economies by limiting inflows and outflows of currency, which can create exchange rate volatility. Second, we have exchange rate regimes. So the price of the dollar in terms of pesos is known as the exchange rate. So like any other commodity, the dollar can be sold or bought in the market at a specific price at a given time. Meaning, an exchange rate regime is how a country deals with its money in the foreign exchange market. So this is because a country's monetary policy is very closely linked to its exchange rate regime. There are also three types of exchange rate. We have flexible exchange rate, which is under this scheme, exchange of dollars to peso is determined by the demand and supply of dollars. So if there are more dollars offered for sale in the market than demanded at a given price, the exchange rate goes down. However, if there are more dollars demanded than dollars for sale, the exchange rate goes up. Second, we have fixed exchange rate, and it is a tool where the rate of exchange is fixed by monetary authorities for extended period of time. With that being said, this enables them to avoid wild price fluctuations in the exchange rate, which can be debilitating for trade and business in general. And lastly, we have multiple exchange rate. So another system by which the foreseen balance of payments problems may be solved is to have multiple exchange rate and have buyers and sellers transact at a different exchange rate. And the last tool is tariffs and subsidies. So tariffs and taxes imposed on imports which are based on either the value of the product or ad valorem or on the physical unit of measure. Paying tax, it puts an added cost to the importer and thus discourage imports. So in simple terms, a tariff is a tax imposed by one country on the goods and services imported from another country. And in the case of subsidies for exporters, it puts the picture in reverse. Here, the government has to dole out an equivalent peso in order to achieve a foreign exchange balance or strength. Which means the subsidies or incentives can take diverse forms. The mild ones are the tax credits and allowances, preferred interest rates and credit, while the all-out forms is an actual cash bonus, making it operate like a multiple exchange rate. With that being said, subsidies are direct or indirect payment, economic concession, or privilege granted by a government to private firms, households, or other governmental units in order to promote a public objective. And that is for today's video. My name is Loreto Atamosa. Thank you and see you on the next discussion. Goodbye!